This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. With us this evening, backed by popular demand, Daniel Greenfield, the editor of The Point at frontpagemag.com, and he is a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and he's about 2 million other great things. Daniel, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
Thank you. Only 2 million?
Daniel, fascinating work of yours at Front Page, in the main section of Front Page and on your blog, The Point. And I thought it was due time to get you back on, discuss your brilliant work, and go over all the, what words do I use during these times? Interesting times, intriguing times, eerie times, bizarre times. What a period that we're in. So why don't we just start? Daniel, what do you make of the balloons and quote-unquote UFOs flying around, the little bit of the peculiar reaction to them from the Biden administration, China's involvement? What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, the Biden administration, it's been amply documented, was aware of the balloon. They kept it secret from the American people. The Chinese certainly knew they had a balloon flying overhead. So who were they keeping it secret from? They weren't keeping it secret from China. They were keeping it secret from us. If a guy hadn't decided to, see it and start recording it over in Montana, we wouldn't have known about it at all. And now, of course, much more has come out, which is that people in the military, certainly people in the Biden administration, were well aware that there was an extensive spying program. They said nothing about it. They did nothing about it. Then when it actually came to the attention of the American people, then suddenly there was reaction. And when you actually look back at materials, you can read between the lines that this was actually known. Last year, the year before, there was suddenly this big furor over UFOs. And of course, people were very eager. There are UFOs. There are so many encounters with UFOs. A number of these UFOs were described as being balloon-like. We now know what that means. A whole bunch of them were balloons. Some of them likely were Chinese surveillance balloons. And beyond that, we know there were drones that China was actually actively employing that were wrongly described as UFOs. There were videos that, people passed around. What is this going on? This looks like UFOs. In fact, we know a number of those were actually drones that were being operated off Chinese vessels that were spying on U.S. Navy craft. Same thing goes with the Chinese balloons. They are very actively spying on our defenses. They're going after Navy bases, Air Force bases, which means that they're considering a war, and they're considering this war not only in terms of what goes on in China or the South China Sea, they're thinking about what a war would look like in the American mainland. And that should be disturbing as hell, far more disturbing than the UFOs.
Thank you, Daniel. Chuck Schumer told us we don't need to worry about it because the Chinese have been caught and they're so embarrassed and humiliated now, and they're probably just going to stop all this because they're just so embarrassed. Daniel, the way these leftists think, one doesn't know whether to laugh or cry.
Has the Biden administration actually stopped anything because they've been caught? They have not. Leftists, Marxists, communists, totalitarians in general don't stop because they get caught. They certainly don't get embarrassed. They feel no shame. If Senator Schumer's career is a tribute to anything, is the fact that he is one of the more shameless people in politics. And Joe Biden, who now sits in the White House, is even more shameless than Schumer. Pelosi recently had to call it quits as even more shameless than Schumer. So there's a tier of authority within leftist circles. And the more shameless they are, the more they're dominant, the more they win. That's been the leftist philosophy all along. They're lying to us openly. We know they're lying. They know they're lying. They know we know they're lying, yet they don't stop doing this. So, of course, China is doing the same thing on an even bigger scale.
I think maybe if we had somebody like Trump in power, Reagan in power, somebody that resembles something to do with Chuck Norris or Sylvester Stallone or Steven Seagal or John Wayne. But basically our leadership now is, I could refer to it in a few ways, but I won't at this point, but it's clear what I'm saying here. So the Chinese communists have zero respect. They're not afraid in the least. They're flying spy missions over American territory, and when they're caught, they don't apologize. They just double down with more threats. What does that say about our leadership and how it's regarded by our enemies?
We're seen as weak and unserious, which is, exactly what happened. Look at the events after we shot down the balloon. The Biden administration butched up. They made this big show. We're going to shoot down this balloon. We're going to shoot down a bunch of other balloons, which seemingly turned out not to even have anything to do with anything. But they put on a big show for the American people. We are tough guys. What were they doing with China all this time? Well, they were desperately trying to get China to answer the phone. The Pentagon kept contacting China, and China refused to respond. It took them, I think, 4 or 5 days to finally pick up the phone. When we're the ones chasing them, we're the weak ones, and that's pretty obvious. The same thing was going on during the Obama administration. The Obama administration kept chasing Putin. They kept waiting for him. Kerry had the thing where he waited for like a week to get anybody in Russia to answer the phone and actually talk to him. This is pathetic. If you're the one who is doing the chasing, you're the weak party. Russia understands this. China understands this. All of our enemies understand this. As a military power, we are in theory stronger, but our morale is much weaker. We're afraid, we're erratic, we need to be liked, and we get very insecure when other countries aren't actively talking to us. China doesn't get insecure when we don't talk to them. We get insecure. What does this say?
Yeah. Daniel, just to center in on the balloons and quote-unquote UFOs, just want to get your perspective on something here. I've been studying the UFOs for a long time, and I find it interesting how conspiracy theorists or people that even study UFOs are ridiculed and laughed at. There was a lot of ridicule of people that thought that maybe Oswald wasn't the lone shooter, and more we're starting to figure out, and evidence that's coming out, that it wasn't just Oswald. There's some questions with 9/11 as well. I used to think the 9/11 truthers were completely crazy. The more I study that event, there's some questions there, some disturbing questions. And so just, and those people that were saying that COVID and the lockdowns, that all of this is just a stage, they were laughed at. And when people were trying to warn that the globalists and the evil powers behind the globalists are trying to create a one world government, and there's going to be a digital ID, and eventually they're going to try to put it under our skin, and they're going to blend humans with technology in Antichrist style. People who warned about that were all laughed at, and now in terms of the announcements of Klaus Schwab and Harari, they're just very openly verbalizing what they're planning to do with all of this stuff. That's my little introduction to what I'm going to say now. Just in terms of these UFOs, I don't know, but there's some legitimate questions about UFOs, and something's definitely been hidden from people, and there seems to be more talk about UFOs. It's almost like we're being prepared for something. As a Christian in our faith, we don't see these aliens as entities and species from other planets. We mostly see this as demonic entities from a different dimension. But I don't know. In terms of yourself, in terms of your Jewish faith and also your knowledge, do you have any comment on UFOs and this kind of recent... There's a lot of commotion about UFOs recently. Are we being prepared for something? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, when it comes to space aliens, what strikes me about it is kind of similar to the obsession with something that may seem very different, but that the left is also fixated on getting us to accept, which is the idea that men and women are interchangeable, that indeed really there's no such thing as men and women. Now, bring this up to the idea of the human species. Religion, Judeo-Christian religion certainly says that we are a unique creation, that God created man in his image. This obsession with the idea that there are other intelligent forms of life in the universe that kind of maybe even look like us, really reject this idea, the centrality of humanity, the centrality of the human connection to God. And well, there are just a lot of species out there. We just happen to be one of them. This is, the secular atheistic view. Somewhere
Okay.
there are Martians and Klingons and whatever the aliens in Star Wars are, and all these species are just natural product of evolution in a chaotic universe, which has no real room for God. So the idea of dethroning the centralization of humanity, dethroning the idea of men and women, this is really part of the larger secular project to reduce people to just a kind of a biological accident with no innate importance or centrality. And this has really been expressed in a lot of these. Some of the UFOs are outright cult movements. Like there were aliens who were supposed to try to clone human beings. They claim to have cloned human beings. And they openly are basically pushing this kind of pagan agenda and associating it with. But even in a lot of the entertainment we get, like The Day the Earth Stood Still, I believe is the name of the movie, where, the aliens come down to us as God and they tell exactly humanity what they should be doing. They should end the Cold War, of course, this kind of thing. So the idea that we're going to be worshiping these things that are coming from the sky, or that these things that are coming from the sky are going to tell us that really there's nothing special about humanity. We're just monkeys in a universe that is full of different life forms. And we should not actually believe this idea that we were created with a purpose by a God. And that is what a lot of this is really about. The more you get people to believe this, the more you get people away from God. And remember, the left is it is a religion, it is a cult. It has its own beliefs that are in actuality quite supernatural, but they cloak them in science. And that's what this is about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Daniel. Yes, it's incredible. And, I don't know if it's incredible, but just very sobering and telling how the left exploits every single ingredient in our life and in the universe. But absolutely, for you and I as Jews and Christians, we believe that in Genesis when it says, let us make God in our own image, and definitely for the left and for evil forces, they hate humans for being created by our Lord in the image of God, and they want to minimize and trivialize it, and and if there's aliens and whatever, to constantly push this thing that humans aren't sacred and important.
The rights movement, incidentally,
Yeah.
rights for monkeys, recognizing other sapient species. So there's a continuum of this.
Yes, yes. Daniel, so, everywhere we look, just so heart-shattering. So the tragic death of Yaakov, Israel Fali, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the 6-year-old boy who was killed along with quite a few victims. There was another death in the recent Islamic terrorist attack in Jerusalem. Just heartbreaking. And what do you make of that attack? And of course, let's just add this. The Palestinian Authority, the Palestinians are doing this. It's the car jihad tactic this time. And you've done quite a bit of great work on this. You just had a feature lead at Front Page about Biden is giving these terrorists money. He's giving the Palestinian Authority money. And the more money that the Biden administration gives to the Palestinian Authority, the more Israelis die in terrorist attacks. Trump cut off the money to this terrorist entity, less Israelis died. And how sad and tragic that the left is in power and the Palestinian Authority very clearly stands for terrorism, for killing Jews. They have their pay for slay. And the Biden administration just gives them money, funds them, and innocent Israelis, including a 6-year-old boy, are being murdered.
The Obama and the Biden administration funded Islamic terrorists who killed Americans, who killed Europeans, and of course, who killed Israelis. In 2019, President Trump cut off all aid to the Palestinian Authority. And in 2020, do you know what? There were only 3 Israelis killed that whole year. So far in 2023, 10 Israelis, including, yes, that 6-year-old boy, his 8-year-old brother, have been killed. 10, that's just in the first month and a half. The increase has been absolutely catastrophic. In the latest article that I did for Front Page Magazine, I noted it was a 900% increase from 2020. And the numbers are just getting worse and worse because the Biden administration is providing money, it's providing political support, it has put into place Terrorism supporters like Hadi Amir, who is now the administration's big liaison to the so-called Palestinians, to the Palestinian Authority, which is the PLO, which is a terrorist organization. As a result, the violence is increasing. People are dying. Israelis are dying. Other people who are just there on the spot are dying. And this is the same part of the same pattern that we've seen in Afghanistan. We've seen it elsewhere. We've seen it in America. Innocent people are once again dying. They're falling to the hands of Islamic terrorists because the Biden administration, like the Obama administration, is interested in supporting the terrorists. They believe that the terrorists are the good guys. They're the innocent victims, and they're innocent victims. People like, Yaakov, Fali, a 6-year-old boy, are the real perpetrators. The Biden administration has repeatedly attacked, condemned Israel. Every few days now, there's another statement, another press release, another condemnation of something that Israel is doing. Meanwhile, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, is actively maintaining what you mentioned, Pay for Slay, which is a program that actively rewards the terrorists or their survivors with annual salaries that are well above what people there expect to earn. We're talking thousands of dollars a month in a place where the average salary is a fraction of that, less than a quarter of that. So they're incentivizing the terrorism. And then the Biden administration has not said a single thing to them. Biden made an appearance with Mahmoud Abbas, the dictator of the Palestinian Authority. Blinken recently made an appearance there, talked about programming over $1 billion for them. And not a single word, not a single direct statement saying you should actually stop funding terrorists.
Thank you, Daniel. Very, very vital article that you wrote on this. I encourage everybody to read it. The title is "After Biden Sent $1 billion to PLO, Israeli Deaths Rose 900%." That's by Daniel Greenfield at Front Page Magazine. Daniel, I find it, I think it's just so important just to crystallize things and not to blur things, just to really say it. And it's something that always really bothered me about O'Reilly when he was on Fox, when he played, I don't know if he was playing it or if he believed it, but when he was doing that fair and balanced thing. And on some things, you don't do fair and balanced. You don't do, like, I'm not saying he said this, I'm using a metaphorical analogy. You don't get on TV and start pretending you're fair and balanced and start saying, well, there was Auschwitz, but, a lot of the Nazis were upset. I mean, you don't do that. You don't, there was one time he was on there, oh, well, the Iranian women and under Islam, they want to wear the hijab. I mean, I don't know. Like, you don't do that. You don't do that. When there are laws which say that you will be killed and put in prison and tortured if you don't wear the hijab, a person really doesn't have a real choice in that way. Where I'm getting to with this is O'Reilly was constantly saying, well, I really think that Obama really means well. I really think he wants to do the right thing. I mean, why is he was always saying that. Why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? I really think that he means well. And I think it's vile that he did that. And if anybody does that, because we don't play fair and balanced with these kind of sacred things. Obama didn't mean well. Obama doesn't mean well. Biden doesn't mean well. Leftists don't mean well when there's a Palestinian Authority that very clearly funds terrorism to kill Jews. They very clearly have pay for slay. They very clearly give money and support to the families of terrorists and jihadists. And so where I'm going with this is when Biden gives money to these jihadis that kill Jewish people and Americans and etc. The Biden administration does this. The Obama administration did it. And of course, this is the Obama administration's third term. Leftists do this because there is malice, there is Jew hate, and there is America hate, and there is human hatred in their heart.
I couldn't have said it any better myself. There's a right and a wrong. And the big problem with a lot of our society, even the people who are well-meaning, is that they lose sight of the right and the wrong. They try to give every possible benefit of the doubt to the people who are actively trying to destroy them. And there are bad guys who do and think they're good guys. Most bad guys think that they're good guys. The Nazis thought they were the good guys. A lot of serial killers, for that matter, think they're the good guys. It doesn't change the fact that what they're doing is evil. Ultimately, you look at the consequences. rather than just assuming that they have the best of all possible intentions. The communists thought they were the good guys. Pol Pot thought he was the good guy even when he was wiping out much of his population and killing people for wearing glasses. Monsters can think that they're the good guys, but when we lose sight of the fact that they are monsters, when we lose sight of right and wrong, then we have no ability to resist them. We have no ability to fight them.
Thank you, Daniel. And you document, and in your work at Front Page, that you remind everybody in February 2019, President Trump, and God bless him, he instituted a total cutoff of aid to the Palestinian Authority because they're terrorists. In April 2021, the Biden administration restored aid to the PLO. And the PLO has its Pay for Slay program. It rewards terrorists, and including ISIS and Hamas members, with salaries and payments for their families. They're very clear about this. The Palestinian Authority calls for the murder of Jews, praises it, and rewards it. The Biden administration sees this and knows it and gives it $1 billion. As you point out in one of your recent articles, this is in blatant violation of the Taylor Force Act. It is American federal law that prohibits the government from sending American taxpayer dollars to the Palestinian Authority until it stops supporting terrorism. So what the Biden administration is actually doing is illegal. Now, America First Legal, this group under Stephen Miller, has filed a suit against the Biden administration on behalf of the parents of Taylor Force, a non-Jewish Afghanistan war vet that was murdered in Jerusalem. I'm repeating a lot of the information that you have given us, Daniel, in your work. Comment on that a little bit. Stephen Miller's wonderful work, and just how this is all illegal, and I think disgusting is one word I could use.
America First Legal has been fantastic in challenging the Biden administration. They've been good at it because the media has been attacking them nonstop. And this just opens another front in the war on Biden's abuses, because it is illegal. So much of what the Biden administration does is illegal. We talk about that day in and day out. It's really important to actually condemn it and to actually challenge it in court. Taylor Force served in Afghanistan. He served in Iraq. He was visiting Israel. He was there in Jerusalem. He was stabbed to death by a terrorist. That terrorist, the entire terrorist infrastructure has been built to reward crimes like this. And his parents they're fighting for this. They have not given up, and they've asked the Biden administration, they've asked Biden to stop this. The bottom line is the Biden administration is in violation of the law. Members of Congress have noted this. There is now an active lawsuit on the subject. And you have to ask, why is the Biden administration so obsessed with rewarding terrorists? Well, just look at who they've put into place. They've put into place Hadi Amir, I've mentioned before. This is a guy who said that he was inspired by the Intifada. A number of Biden appointees have been open about celebrating Islamic terrorism against Jews and in general. They're enemies of this country. And when you look at who was actually funding Biden back in the day, a lot of this falls into place. Biden's big funders actually came out of Iran. The people who were involved with the Iran lobby, people involved with advocating for the Islamic terrorist regime were major funders of Biden. This is a guy who is very much drawn not just on the far left, but it's drawn on these various Islamist groups and figures who are trying to destroy America. So Biden administration is rewarding its donors, it's rewarding its backers, and it's rewarding them by funding the murder of Jews. And in my article, I estimated that the death of Yaakov Fali, that 6-year-old boy, probably cost the Palestinian Authority about $10,000, which is, from their perspective, a pretty good deal. The Biden administration has pumped over $1 billion in aid into the terrorist territories, and it's made very clear that it's going to continue pumping money. And we see the consequences. We saw the consequences in Afghanistan. When all of that money was pumped into Afghanistan, they were actually trying to deliver money even after Afghanistan fell. And we now see images, for example, of stacks of $100 bills showing up at the Kabul airport. It's unclear where they're coming from. The Biden administration is stonewalling on this. So they're funding terrorism in Israel. They're funding terrorism in Afghanistan. They're funding terrorism around the world, including in our own country.
It's heartbreaking, Daniel, and we have to kind of rejuvenate our mind and have a certain psychological strength and perspective each day to continue on fighting just in the face of all of this evil that's in power, that's accelerating, that's escalating. You know, I think about the ladies on The View, Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, Sunny Hostin. You know, they're very against racism, and they're just so against racism. And on CNN, you know, Don Lemon and Anderson Cooper, you know, they're really against racism, and MSNBC is just so against racism. And, you know, and I have the great luxury and, you know, the great pleasure of keeping an eye on the left, so I'm watching them. I've been watching for quite a while now. I haven't seen any lead feature or any coverage on Yaakov Fali, why he died. I haven't seen them given any time to his death, and especially why he died, and for them to be upset about the Islamic racism, a theological racism, one could say, against the Jewish people. They're pretty quiet about that form of racism, aren't they?
We're not even supposed to talk about that, just like it has not been reported that after the car jihad attack, there were fireworks and celebrations in Islamic areas. There were videos, tweets for that matter, glorifying the attack and just outright ghoulish celebrating. And this is something we see. I mean, we saw these same people handing out candy on September 11th and cheering and celebrating. This is something President Trump mentioned and that the media insistently lied about until there was documented evidence that it actually did happen. So this is the culture we're dealing with, and the media and the Democrats on the left have gotten on board with it. When Republicans pushed Ilhan Omar off the House Foreign Affairs Committee, every single Democrat, even the ones who claim to be pro-Israel, voted in defense of her and insisted that the moment they take back the House, she's going to be in the committee, she's going to be on top of everything. Bottom line is this is what they are committed to, and they have to lie about it, because if you actually look at this straight up, if you look at the murder of a 6-year-old boy and his 8-year-old brother and the celebrations of that, if you think about the mindset of people who respond to the murder of a 6-year-old boy by shooting off fireworks and handing out candy and honking their horns and cheering and celebrating, then you have to really recognize the fact that we are not dealing with a political problem here. We're not dealing with something that involves a negotiated solution or a dialogue. We're dealing with good and evil here, and that's something they don't want to discuss. They have no framework for conceptualizing good and evil. They don't even believe that there's a good and evil, except that they believe that America is wrong about everything and civilization is wrong about everything. And this is a struggle between civilization and barbarism, between good and evil, between darkness and light. And we see that very clearly when we actually look at what's going on.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I've given a lifetime of thought to this since I was a little kid. And I wrote United in Hate. I wrote Jihadist Psychopath, those 2 books where I explored this evil, and especially the left supporting it. And so, you know, David Potter, a historian, wrote quite a bit about negative identification, which I talk about in my books, and how people can live vicariously in a negative way through a movement that they support. To make a long story short, what I'm talking about here is when leftists support Castro, when leftists support the Palestinian Authority, when leftists support Stalinist regimes vicariously, they're actually enjoying the torture and the murder of the people that is occurring under the regimes and that they support. The left is full of malice and sadism, and there's a reason why they were so quick, many of them were so quick to have the evil, unvaccinated people not only barred from everywhere, but you know, losing their jobs, but they're pretty ready to put the unvaccinated people into concentration camps. This is the way their hate manifests itself. Thank you so much, Daniel. We're going to take a quick break with our sponsors.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell. Years ago, when I invented MyPillow, I was faced with every adversity you could think of. No retailers wanted to sell MyPillow. That's come full circle. Vendors took advantage of me, and I was copied by China. Well, by the grace of God, I was able to get through all that and learn from it. I have a passion to help other U.S. entrepreneurs, and that's why I created my new platform, mystore.com. We have hundreds of products from amazing entrepreneurs, and to celebrate, I'm going to put my pillows on mystore.com right now. You can get my standard My Pillows regularly $69.98, now only $19.98 with your promo code. Or you can get my standard queen size, regular $79.98, now only $29.98. Or you can get my premium king size, regularly $89.98, now only $34.98. So go to mystore.com and use that promo code on your screen to get huge discounts on all My Store products. Thank you and God bless.
And we are back with the great Daniel Greenfield, and we have the privilege and the honor of him sharing his brilliance and wisdom with us. Daniel, it often feels like we're being distracted a lot of the time. So, you know, I don't necessarily believe in every case that everything is a distraction and everything is, you know, conspiracy. But these balloons, UFOs, it's interesting. This happened at exactly the time when some other things were happening. So what are some other things that are happening that maybe they don't want us focusing on? And when I say they, I mean the evil globalist powers, their puppets in Washington, the leftist media, etc. Yes, I think that they definitely do work together. And some kind of tragic, strange trail derailment occurred in Ohio recently. Then all these toxic chemicals were released, arguably to avoid an explosion or to get the tracks operable. So the authorities released some of these toxic chemicals, if I'm correct. But this is hurting a lot of people. But anyways, there seemed to be a little bit of a peculiar silence on this. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah. Pete Buttigieg on his perpetual maternity leave took 10 days to mention this. You know, these are the same people who claim that carbon is a pollutant, that every time you take a breath, every time you do anything, you're polluting. We need to control this pollution. They release toxic chemicals that have killed animals, that have poisoned lakes, that have actually gotten into the Ohio River. The results are catastrophic. People are terrified for their lives, for their children. They don't know what kind of consequences there are going to be. Some people are calling this America's Chernobyl. Yet it took Buttigieg 10 days to even comment on it. The Biden administration is hardly paying attention. The media is kind of just wavering in and out in between whatever conservative hit pieces they've come with at any particular moment. If this were a Republican administration, we all know, of course, this would be the #1 story ever. We recall the whole circus in Hurricane Katrina, the supposed piles of bodies that Brian Williams of NBC News was encountering, Kanye West claiming that Bush doesn't care about Black people, these stories that there's just cannibalism going on in the stadium. All of these turned out to be lies. There was zero accountability for it from the media. So we know exactly how the media would cover it. We know under the Trump administration what they did when there were water issues in certain areas, in certain Black neighborhoods and communities and cities. They immediately made this the biggest story ever. And you know, you can poison an entire community, you can poison thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people, and it gets much less attention than a guy being killed by police officers in Memphis, because it's all about political narratives. And yes, there are, of course, things that we are meant to pay attention to and things we are not meant to pay attention to. We're not meant to pay attention to stories that damage the Democrats. Keep in mind, Buttigieg is not just a cabinet member, he's one of the people being touted to potentially replace Biden. This guy has his backers and he has his PAC, which means there are people out there who actually want him to potentially replace Biden to be the next president of the United States, as horrifying as that thought may be. And the guy who's supposed to be the next president of the United States may have overseen a disaster that was going to go on to kill thousands, tens of thousands of people. That's not a story you want to talk about if you're in the media.
Well, Daniel, there's something else that we're not allowed to talk about, and I even feel right now when I'm going to, you're not allowed to say what I'm about to say. You made a little reference there with your brilliant sense of humor that you're not allowed to do anymore. It's very interesting when we can't say something in our society anymore, and I guess I'm going to say it now, but I guess I'm just a very evil person that's just supporting and causing murder and mayhem by asking this. Daniel, you said that Pete Buttigieg is on maternity leave. Let me just ask this. Did he have a baby recently?
Oh, he bought a baby.
He what?
He bought a baby
With who?
with his boyfriend, apparently.
Okay, so him and his boyfriend have a baby. So neither of them conceived and had a baby. They bought a baby, right?
Well, they're not biologically capable of having a baby, obviously. I know biology has been banned now, and we're not supposed to deal with any such matters. But
So just a sec, you're saying that males cannot have a baby?
well, that's what science tells us. But apparently, the great believers in science don't believe in science.
Who can have a baby?
Well, as God said, Adam and Eve, go forth and multiply, be fruitful. It applies to men and women. If you try to sideline that, it still does not work.
Could you and I agree that it is women that have babies?
Without a woman, nothing happens.
Right. I think you and I will, in about maybe 5-10 years, be sitting in a concentration camp just for these last 3 minutes when the left achieves total power. Daniel, let's move on. You have pointed out that it might not be Hunter that's a danger to old Joe. It might be a guy by the name of James Biden that poses quite a bit of danger to the president. Could you tell us why?
So there's obviously been a lot of focus on Hunter Biden because we have the laptops, we have all the salacious materials in them, but a lot of the connection between the Hunter Biden stuff and the Joe Biden stuff is not as strong as it could be. However, James Biden, Joe's brother, former nightclub manager, has spent a whole lot more time making ridiculous business deals, ridiculously high-end business deals, and engaging in behavior that strikes a whole lot of people as corrupt, based entirely on his connection to Joe Biden. And he's been pretty willing and open to say that it is because of those connections. And some of those have backfired very badly. Before the election, I covered a story about what happened to a bunch of rural hospitals that James Biden got into the business of, promising that Joe Biden's policies were going to completely transform them. And there was really bizarre fallout from those things. The FBI got involved at one point, and supposedly bloodstained currency from some Middle Eastern country was even being dispatched to some of the people who were suing James Biden and the whole group of investors that was responsible for that. It was really disturbing stuff that absolutely did not get covered in the media. The same media that thought that Mitt Romney's comment about Biden is full of women was a major national story that they need to repeat over and over again. Meanwhile, your brother is being sued by people who received bloodstained currency and vague threats. And at the time, James Biden was actually doing business with the Qatar Investment Authority, with Turkish investors. Both of those countries are Islamic terrorists. And yet there was zero attention paid to this.
Thank you, Daniel. Wonder why there's no attention being paid to that. Could you just expand a little bit for us on Jim Biden and the Saudis?
So the latest reports are we actually have an affidavit from a private investigator who interviewed James Biden as part of a lawsuit from one of these deals. This was a major deal that was supposed to be done with the Saudis. And James Biden was really openly telling this private investigator who's interviewing him that, yes, this thing was basically dependent on Joe Biden. And this is not the first time he said stuff like this. He's gone around saying that everybody around the world wants to invest in Joe Biden. Again, why don't you hear that? This is an incredibly damning comment. And, James Biden in the past had business deals in Iraq. He had business deals in all sorts of flashpoints that his brother was heavily involved in. And it's been an open secret that he's only able to do this. Even the media reported on this because of his brother. And now, of course, we're not supposed to talk about this, but James Biden has been fairly open about this. And unlike Hunter, there's not going to be this whole defense of, well, he's a poor dear, he's on drugs, he's recovering from his brother's death. I know he was not in his proper mind. James Biden has been doing this for a long time. He's not traumatized. He's been very successful at monetizing his brother. And Joe Biden has met some of the people that James Biden has introduced to him. There are a whole bunch of connections there, which may very, very well prove to be fertile territory.
Yeah, I don't think that was on CNN or MSNBC or The View. I must have missed it. Daniel, in one of your other articles, talking about in the UK, the children that are being referred for transgendering. And, the left wants to paint, this whole transgendering and, just the boy or the girl, they're just kind of born in the wrong body. And at 4 or 5 or 6, if you just tell them, oh, do you feel like a girl or a boy today? And if the boy says, oh, I want to be a girl, just operate on the boy and cut off his penis and, do all that stuff and call him Susie, and that's completely okay. Anybody that's against that is evil and sponsoring murder and killing. And so you point out that there's new statistics and new evidence surfacing that the children who are referred for transgendering are very troubled and wounded in many ways, including being on the autism spectrum and other things, having depression related to other issues. But one of the facts is that the children who are referred for transgendering are 10 times more likely to have a sex offender as a parent. I don't think that Anderson Cooper or Don Lemon are going to do a 1-hour special on that. But could you tell us something about that?
Those numbers are statistically stunning. It's not hugely surprising that the vast majority, we're talking in over 90% of children who are being referred in the UK for transgender treatment, for so-called gender-affirming care, the euphemism that they use here, were themselves suffering from autism, depression, various problems. The bottom line is that transgenderism is the horrible new therapy that they've come up with now. In the past, they were cutting off parts of the brain. They were using electroshock. They were applying them with all sorts of drugs that turned out to be very destructive. This is their latest solution to a problem that creates much worse problems. But the sex offender statistic is the one that really jumps out at you. It is really disturbing because, for that matter, there aren't that many sex offenders in the UK. The latest statistics I saw were about 60,000. If we're talking about those children being 10 times more likely than the general population to have a sex offender as a parent, it is impossible to ignore the connection there. It's impossible to ignore the reality that there's grooming going on here, that these children are being primed in one way or another by a deeply disturbed, possibly outright evil parent who is making them live out whatever perverted fantasies that they have. It's a horrifying reality, one that cannot be discussed in this country. The interesting thing is that in Europe and the UK, they are actually having these discussions. There's a full-on debate. J.K. Rowling is not entirely unrepresentative of the situation in Europe. In America, though, the moment you dissent in any possible way, the New York Times was very gingerly tiptoeing around, suggesting that maybe some of this is actually kind of peer spread. It's a response to social media. They were doing it very, very carefully in the most careful way possible. And now they're under attack from a whole bunch of their contributors. There's a whole letter campaign. There's an ad campaign claiming that the New York Times, of all places, is transphobic. So here, even the smallest, most careful, most gingerly efforts to question this kind of disastrous actions that are destroying the lives of so many children, well, the more you get destroyed right away. But in the UK, they're actually having a debate. They're bringing out powerful statistics that are completely changing the argument and turning the whole policy infrastructure around.
Interesting. I wonder if this has something to do with Satan engaging in child sacrifice. I don't know. I think I'll wait for Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg to ask a Christian theologian that question on The View. Daniel, we're supposed to buy electric cars because they're so much cheaper than gas, the evil gasoline. Oops, your latest blog reveals that charging electric cars now costs more than gas. This causes a little bit of a problem for the globalist leftist agenda, doesn't it?
Well, this is their agenda. Their agenda all along was to make cars unaffordable for the average person. They've been saying this very clearly, whether it's Schwab or the World Economic Forum or the various institutions here. They want to make cars really expensive, which electric cars are. We're talking $65,000. You're not going to afford that. They want you to be on public transportation or, Shanks Mere. And even if you get the electric car, what happens? Just like in California, they can cut off electricity. When you're dependent on the power grid, They control the power grid. They can say, we're only going to charge cars on alternate days, which they indeed did, or you can only charge your car so much, or we're going to track exactly how much you're driving, because these are all smart cars. Joe Biden in his recent State of the Union address was talking about how, we cannot even make cars because we need these chips from China, and, we need to make these chips. You don't actually have to make cars smart. You're making cars smart for the most part because you want to actually be able to track people, which is part of the whole Inflation Reduction Act, the Inflation Increase Act. They wanted to be able to measure, they wanted to experiment with taxes that would actually track how far the car is traveling, mileage taxes rather than gas taxes. So they're preparing this new infrastructure, which is going to control and reduce your ability to go anywhere. It's the new feudalism. And, in New England, there's consequences, because in New England, the people who bought electric cars are now discovering that, oh no, those electric cars now actually cost more to charge than the cost of gasoline. When the price of gas was really high, the Biden administration was saying, you should buy electric cars, buy electric cars. Well, what happened is the electric cars are still dependent on being charged, and they're dependent on charging in systems that are still powered by fuel. So you're not getting away from this. You can try to artificially lower gas prices, but they've artificially raised the cost of fuel because they continue to refuse to engage in proper drilling and proper exploration. They're crippling our ability to actually get affordably priced fuel. So people are having trouble heating their homes, and yes, they're having trouble charging their cars.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Oh, the left's paradise. Get rid of the gasoline-powered cars. Take the cars away from humans, the gas-powered ones. Get rid of cash. Get rid of individuals owning guns. And then bring in the global digital ID system. And, the day will come when somebody like me will use a credit card and they'll say, "We're sorry, sir, it's been declined. You were overheard praising Donald Trump." You'll have to change your political views. Thank you very much. See you again. Crazy world we're entering. We're running out of time. Very quickly here, Daniel, please. Didn't want to end the show without mentioning your other fascinating blog. It turns out that when you shout a racial slur at a black person, it produces a different gut bacteria than if you shout a racial slur at a white person. We're against all racial slurs, but there is this particular leftist study now that's come out telling us that arthritis in black people is caused by systematic racism. Tell us about this.
Well, the Democrats, beginning with the Biden administration, have falsely claimed that racism, systemic racism, is a public health crisis. What do they mean by that? What they mean is that everything that black people or any other minority group is dealing with, they're going to try to trace back to systemic racism, including when it comes to health crisis, anything medical. So there have been a raft of these studies which attack things from different areas. Obesity is, of course, caused by systemic racism. Athlete's foot, systemic racism. And in this case, arthritis, they're claiming is systemic racism, that they did the study and they claim that the people who feel most discriminated against, at least in a small sample group in Los Angeles, that black people are experiencing inflammation from that group that's causing arthritis, and the white people are not. Therefore, it's clear that black people are affected to such a degree by racism that they develop arthritis. I mean, you ask anybody who's done any kind of scientific work, who's done any kind of studies, this is obviously garbage, but it's also part of a larger agenda, which is that the claim is that racism is a public health crisis. Therefore, to deal with this public health crisis, you need a totalitarian overreach. We've seen this with pandemic, which was very much a trial run. You need the government to urgently intervene to stop this public health crisis. And of course, you need to eliminate freedom of speech. You need to wipe out any kind of political dissent. And you need to eliminate any kind of states' rights, any kind of local authority, and basically give the left the complete, utter power to transform society to solve this latest medical crisis of systemic racism.
Medicalizing racism. I wonder who did that. Oh, the Nazis, to pave the road to Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and Dachau. And the left is doing it very well. Daniel Greenfield, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you for a great conversation.
Always an honor to have you here. Thank you, Daniel. Ladies and gentlemen, The Point at frontpagemag.com. That is Daniel Greenfield's blog. The Point at frontpagemag.com. Visit that blog every 5 minutes and press refresh. Brilliant blog. And of course, also be reading frontpagemag.com because Daniel Greenfield's articles are also there as well, along with many other brilliant writers. We'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.